You've heard me say countless times that poverty is a policy choice, but you don't need to hear it from me when Republicans are very intent on making it clear to you all just how much poverty is indeed a policy choice. My name is Brittany Page, and this is the Page Perspective. Just last week, Donald Trump and his Vice President Elon Musk sat down for an interview with Fox News' Sean Hannity to discuss their blossoming love affair. Missing from this interview any coverage about the coup currently underway in our government. More on that in a bit. But let's hear from Donald Trump just days ago on whether he will be looking to cut Medicaid, for example, to pay for his tax cuts for the wealthy and corporations.
Look, Social Security won't be touched. Other than if there's fraud or something, we're going to find it's going to be strengthened, but won't be touched. Medicare, Medicaid, none of that stuff is going to be touched.
Nothing.
You don't have to. Oh. Now, if there are illegal migrants in the system, we're going to get them out of the system and all of that fraud, but it's not going to be touched.
I want you to remember this clip. I want you to save this video. I want you to come back to this because he said Medicaid won't be touched. Of course, he added, other than, those are key words, other than the quote unquote fraud, which we know can mean anything other than actual fraud. Elon and Trump and their sycophants are using the phrase waste, fraud, and abuse without providing the actual existence or evidence of waste, fraud, and abuse. They want you to be able to say, yeah, it seems reasonable to cut waste, fraud, and abuse. But what is waste, fraud, and abuse? Give them no slack. Make them prove it. Trump there in that interview is giving himself the leeway to still make those cuts. How do I know? Just days later, Donald Trump endorsed the House budget, which calls for steep cuts to programs like Medicaid and SNAP. And let's just state this directly. The Republican House budget, endorsed by Donald Trump, seeks to take away health insurance and food assistance from millions of people in order to pay for tax cuts for the most wealthy in this country. They want to take from millions of people to offset tax cuts for the richest. We'll get into the hard numbers on this in a bit, but it is likely that this budget will be voted on Tuesday. And if you follow me on social media, at Brittany E. Page, you've seen my posts encouraging you to call your elected representatives to tell them to vote no. The vote on Tuesday may or may not fail. Republicans have a slim majority and they can't afford to lose votes. And several Republicans in swing districts are afraid of how cuts to Medicaid could impact their chances at re-election. That's right. They aren't worried about the negative impact these cuts could have for their constituents. They're worried about their own ability to retain power. Some Democrats are rising to show us the proof that we need to show to others that Republicans are not out here fighting for you. They are not fighting for the working class. They are fighting to protect the wealthy few. Enter Representative Jim McGovern from Massachusetts, the ranking member of the House Rules Committee. He decided to engage in an exercise to expose the lengths to which Republicans will go to protect the wealthy at the expense of the poor and working class. And even I was shocked by this. This committee was meeting on the Republican budget, and Congressman McGovern used this opportunity to offer an amendment preventing tax giveaways for people making over $1 million per year. Let's see how it goes.
So I'm offering this amendment, which is very simple. It prevents tax cuts for people earning over $1 million per year. So a yes vote on this amendment prevents those making $1 million a year from getting another tax handout.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mrs. Fishbach?
No.
Mrs. Fishbach, no. Mr. Norman? No. Mr. Norman, no. Mr. Roy? No. Mr. Roy, no. Mrs. Houchin? No. Mrs. Houchin, no. Mr. Langworthy? No. Mr. Langworthy, no. Mr. Scott? No. Mr. Scott, no. Mr. Griffith? No. Mr. Griffith, no. Mr. Jack?
No.
Mr. Jack, no. Mr. McGovern?
Aye.
Mr. McGovern, aye. Ms. Scanlon?
Aye.
Ms. Scanlon, aye. Mr. Neguse? Mr. Neguse, aye. Ms. Leisure-Fernandez? Aye. Ms. Leisure-Fernandez, aye. Madam Chair?
No.
Madam Chair, no.
Every single Republican voted no. But Jim McGovern took it further. He said, let's continue to test this. How rich is too rich for tax giveaways. Where is the limit? Is there a limit? Would Republicans support an amendment preventing tax giveaways for those making over $100 million per year?
Okay. Hard to believe that last vote, but I have an amendment to the rule. I move the committee make an order amendment number 79 offered by myself, which prevents tax cuts for people earning over $100 million per year. Madam Chair, every Republican just voted in lockstep to keep our unfair tax system where billionaires pay a lower effective tax rate than working people. But I want to highlight how out of touch my friends are. Again, a yes vote on this amendment prevents people earning over $100 million per year from getting another tax break. So you should vote no if you want to side with the millionaires and billionaires over working people.
The gentleman asked for a roll call. The clerk will call the roll.
Mrs. Fishbach? No. Mrs. Fishbach, no. Mr. Norman? No. Mr. Norman, no. Mr. Roy? No. Mr. Roy, no. Mrs. Houchin? Mrs. Houchin, no. Mr. Langworthy? Mr. Langworthy, no. Mr. Scott? No. Mr. Scott, no. Mr. Griffith? No. Mr. Griffith, no. Mr. Jack?
No.
Mr. Jack, no. Mr. McGovern?
Aye.
Mr. McGovern, aye. Ms. Scanlon? Aye. Ms. Scanlon, aye. Mr. Neguse? Aye. Mr. Neguse, aye. Ms. Ledger-Fernandez? Aye. Ms. Ledger-Fernandez, aye. Madam Chair?
No.
Madam Chair, no.
The clerk will report the total.
4 yeas, 9 nays.
The noes have it. The amendment is not agreed to.
Every Republican voted no again. They said, we cannot burden those making over $100 million per year with their fair share of taxes. No, 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 no. We must prioritize punishing the poor and working class. If you can believe it, he took it even further still. He said, what about the 748 billionaires in this country who pay a lower effective tax rate than the working class? Would the Republicans also protect 748 people from paying their fair share of taxes? Do you want to guess how this one goes? Let's see.
Will my Republican colleagues join Democrats to prevent tax breaks for billionaires? I mean, billionaires? There are 748 billionaires in the United States. That's it. And a lot of them pay a lower effective tax rate than the people we represent because of all the loopholes that you've been successful in getting into the tax code. So I ask my colleagues, who do you stand with? Your constituents or the billionaires? So a yes vote on this amendment means you stand with your constituents. A no vote is to vote to protect the 748 billionaires in this country from paying what they should pay in taxes.
Mrs. Fishbach? No. Mrs. Fishbach, no. Mr. Norman? No. Mr. Norman, no. Mr. Roy? No. Mr. Roy, no. Mrs. Houchin? No. Mrs. Houchin, no. Mr. Langworthy? No. Mr. Langworthy, no. Mr. Scott? No. Mr. Scott, no. Mr. Griffith? No. Mr. Griffith, no. Mr. Jack?
No.
Mr. Jack, no. Mr. McGovern?
Aye.
Mr. McGovern, aye. Ms. Scanlon? Aye. Ms. Scanlon, aye. Mr. Neguse? Mr. Neguse, aye. Ms. Ledger-Fernandez? Aye. Ms. Ledger-Fernandez, aye. Madam Chair?
No.
Madam Chair, no.
The clerk will report the total.
4 yeas, 9 nays.
The noes have it. The amendment is not agreed to.
Every Republican voted no again. And he kept going. He offered an amendment that said no tax giveaways for billionaires at the expense of Medicaid. He said no tax cuts for billionaires if Medicaid is cut by a single cent. And Republicans voted no again. And maybe I'll show you just one more. Here he is attempting to get Republicans on board with an additional amendment that would support working families, specifically the child tax credit.
So just to recap, Republicans just voted 6 times in favor of tax handouts to the rich and powerful. At the very least, they can vote to say that we won't take money out of the pockets of working class families with children, right? So let's find out. On this amendment, a yes vote protects the refundable child tax credit, which puts money in the pockets of regular families. A no vote opens the child tax credit up to cuts, which would mean regular people lose money. I yield back.
And we won't waste time with the vote because, as you can assume at this point, every single Republican on the Rules Committee, again, chose the wealthy few over you. Look at the members of the Rules Committee. Look at these names. These people, if they represent you, they need to hear from you. I will pin a comment on this video with the Capitol switchboard number below. Whether this House budget vote happens today or it happens and fails and they try again later, this is a story that we need to follow because it is an ongoing attempt to break down and dismantle the working class in order to funnel money into the pockets of the wealthy few. And if you want to learn more about billionaires and their taxes compared to you and your taxes, I will link in the description to this Center for American Progress article showing the richest Americans pay lower tax rates than many working class Americans, or to this ProPublica article showing how billionaires use loopholes to skip out on taxes, with the richest people sometimes paying $0 in federal income taxes. Now, there's a lot that I could say about the House budget. This Center for Budget and Policy Priorities analysis shows that millions of people could lose their health coverage through Medicaid, over 36 million people. Over 40 million people could lose access to food assistance through SNAP or have it reduced. As they note, there are real consequences to this. Quote, the loss of Medicaid means, for example, a parent can't get cancer treatment and a young adult can't get insulin to control their diabetes. Cuts to food assistance means a parent skips meals so their children can eat, or an older person who lost their job has no way to buy groceries. These cuts will affect people in every state and of all races and ethnicities, but the impacts will often be especially severe in poorer states and among Black, Latino, and Indigenous people and people in rural communities who have higher poverty rates and thus are more likely to qualify for food assistance and health coverage. Rather than expanding opportunity, the budget would make it harder for people to afford the healthcare and food they need to survive and succeed. And I can't stop thinking about this line. Quote, extending the tax cuts for the top 1% costs $1.1 trillion through 2034, roughly the same amount they are proposing in cuts for millions who rely on Medicaid for health coverage and who use SNAP to buy groceries. Punishing millions and millions of people to protect tax cuts for the wealthiest Americans. That is the Republican Party priority right now. Under the guise of waste, fraud, and abuse, they want to convince you that these tax cuts for the wealthiest will benefit you. They want you to turn against your brothers and sisters who sometimes need help covering their next meal, who may have disabilities and rely on Medicaid for essential life-saving medical care. I hope that you will stand with me and stand against this attempt to prioritize the wealthiest Americans who already have more than enough, and stand with those who need our help right now. Don't forget to check the pinned comment below for information on contacting your elected officials, and don't stop. What do you think? Call and let me know at 202-656-1509 or send an email to idoubt@dollemore.com. You can make sure you're subscribed below by clicking the subscribe button. It is free, or you can click join and become a channel member for as little as $1.99 a month. You can also support my work on Patreon at patreon.com/idoubtitpodcast. Please take care of yourselves amid the onslaught of chaos and find community in the comments below. Take care, and I will see you next time.